The long break is finally over, and a lot has changed within the Junior B landscape. Pop your headphones in and let's take flight on the Junior B's pod on CROW LAX TV.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West. And Kerr.
What?
7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes a shot and buries that.
As we roll along now into July, Canada Day is over. The long weekend is finally over, and we're ready to get back into the arena. Keenen, how are you doing, and what's new?
Doing pretty good. You know, it was a long break. We took a quick week off just for the long weekend, but feels good to be back in the saddle once again as we, saddle up for the last 2 weeks of the regular season. Looking back at those... Oh, sorry?
I was just going to say, it sort of feels like 2 years since we last covered a game. I know it's only been a week, but it really has felt like a long time.
It really has. So looking back at those 2 weeks, quite a few games. We'll start back on Friday, June 21st. A set of 3 as the Warriors head over to Fort Saskatchewan, knocking them off 13-12. Shamrocks and Marauders also a 1-goal game. Tight. Shamrocks taking the victory 9-8. And the Kings and Silvertips, once again, 3 sets of 1-goal games as the Kings knock off the Central Division leaders 8-7. On Saturday the 22nd, had a total of 6 games. Outlaws heading down south to take on the Rockies, 13-8 final score in favor of the Outlaws. Rebels and CROW in St. Albert, 14-6 your final score in favor of the Rebels. Shamrocks and the Mounties meeting one more time this year, 9-7 Shamrocks. Rampage head down into Calgary to take on the Chill. The Chill walk away with the victory, 13-10. And the Kings continue on their road trip, this time heading over to Mountain View as they take out the Mavericks 13-8. And the Blizz and SWAT in the first of their 2-game set on that weekend, 17-4 for the Blizz. Sunday the 23rd, 5 games. Mavericks take out the Warriors 12-8 in the Warriors barn. And 4 home victories as the Outlaws visit the Marauders and the Marauders take them down 13-6. Rockies visit the Rampage 21-5 in favor of Red Deer. Kings visit the Chill for their final of the 3-game road trip, and the Chill end up taking them out 13-11. And the SWAT in the second game against the Blizz gets shut out. 18-0 Blizz victory. Then moving into last weekend, Thursday the 27th, 2 games as the Warriors take out the Outlaws 8-5, and the Mounties had the Marauders in town, and the Mounties take the victory 11-6. And finally, ahead of the long weekend, 3 games on the 28th, the Shamrocks beating the Rockies 22-2. Mavericks go into Red Deer, win that game 9-8. And the SWAT and Kings as the Kings return home for a single game against them, a 13-7 victory in favor of Queen City.
Thanks for that rundown. As we were just talking about, it's been a while, Keenen, so it's nice to make sure that everybody's up to date around the league. And now let's move into what I thought might be a little bit more of a busy deadline. It didn't turn out that way, but there was a few moves, including one major one. We'll start with that as the Warriors and CROW connect on what really could change the landscape and the division, not only the division, the North Division itself and how those playoffs play out, but beyond into the Larry Bishop. And this trade went down the last Tuesday night between the Warriors and the CROW. To the Warriors went Josh Fodchuk, who was the main piece in this trade, Cale Harris, Nash Knowlton, who's permanent. Now, Fodchuk and Harris are both rentals. They go back to the CROW after the season's done. Nash Knowlton, the righty-o, will stay Warriors property. Caden Pickering, who's a graduating defender, and a 3rd and a 5th go to the Warriors. And back the other way, a 1st, a 2nd, and Liam Elliott, a promising young righty from the Warriors, goes to St. Albert. He's permanent. and that's a big get for them. And now the Crew look to continue to try to build for next year with the Larry Bishop being held in the fort, and the Warriors look to, as I've said multiple times, are going to look to really make one last push before their roster really gets destroyed moving into next year. And on paper, this looks like a really rough trade for the Warriors. I mean, they gave up a lot. I think they probably could have found a way to keep Liam Elliott. But when you look at it circumstantially, and if you look at it from a Warriors perspective and the position they're in, I think, A, it makes a lot of sense. They had to do it. And B, any kind of negative spin you could put on this is kind of counteracted by the fact that they were going to be in some real trouble roster-wise anyways next year. So going for it while they can, I think, is all you can ask from any organization. So I think from that aspect, I think it was a smart move. But man, the Crew made out really well here. They get a legitimate right-hander that could be a top 10 type player by next year. I know that game in the fort a couple weeks ago, Elliott really stood out, and he was able to come back after a few rougher games, coming back from a wrist injury. He's a real difference maker in that game, and that's what he can be. I think the Warriors, from their perspective, they wanted to get a little bit grittier on the right side, somebody that would play more of an inside game, and that's why I think they wanted Knowlton. But I think also it's important to remember that every player has their strengths, and I think sometimes people get caught up in wanting a player to be something they're not. And I think that Elliott is a case of, if you really focus on his strengths and understand what he can bring, he can be that difference maker. And I think that there's real potential for him to take off with the Crew moving forward. So I think overall, where both teams are right now, I think it's a really good trade. I think it helps both teams to try to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So full marks to both of those squads. Now, meanwhile, the Mavericks go out and get a little creative. They acquire Carter Michaluk and Wyatt Fancy from the Cranbrook Black Wolves. And anybody who's unaware of who or what the Cranbrook Black Wolves are, they spent last year in the Tier 2 division in Alberta in the RMLL and put in a little bit of a bid to get into Tier 1, got turned down, and ended up in the Okanagan League, Junior B League out there. But they're still able to make a trade, or the Mavericks are still able to make a trade. They send back cash and futures to Cranbrook. And Carter Michaluk did put up a hat trick. I was under the impression, I think he is, but I'm not exactly sure, that he's a back eight guy. But he puts up a hat trick against Red Deer in that 9-8 big time win for the Mavericks on the road Friday night. So that trade looks like it's paying off dividends already. The Chill also went to Cranbrook and grabbed Davis Michaluk and Brandon Hoshman. Now on the site, they spell the two Michaluks names differently, one with an A, one with an E. I don't know if that's a mistake. At first glance, I thought they were brothers, but the fact that they spell their names differently, if that's not a mistake, would indicate they're not. If anybody has any inside information on that, feel free to share. But both of those teams in the Central go out and pad their rosters. And the Mavericks also were able to pick up goaltender Jordan Peck from the Crew for future considerations and cash. So those were the outright trades, but there's also a couple of other moves here that we should point out that are maybe even bigger. The biggest one of all is it is Ben Royer moving down from the minors back onto the Warriors roster. This happened before midnight on July 1. And not only Royer, but Cole Stashnik were also let go by the minors and are back in the Warriors fold. And I can't stress, honestly, this, like I said, this is really, really big for the Warriors. Royer's a play driver, and he makes other guys around him better. And I think that's the biggest compliment you can give a guy. And I think that that right there drastically improves the Warriors' chances moving forward. And Stashnik is obviously a guy that's a loose ball hound and gives them another transition option that they desperately needed, as they were really struggling to get the ball cleanly up the floor at times lately. Keenan, what are your initial takes off of some of the movement we saw and how some of these teams are going to stack up moving as we move into the playoffs?
I think there were a couple of interesting moves in this trade deadline. And like you said, it wasn't a very busy one, but it was a substantial one, it felt like. And like you said, the Fodchuk deal between the Warriors and the CROW, and normally you would talk about winners and losers of a trade, and I don't like to word it that way, especially in a league like this, because I think this, like you said, this trade benefits both clubs. Do I think there was a bit of an overpay maybe on the Warriors side? Yeah, but the CROW had all of the bargaining power, essentially, knowing how much of a hot commodity Fodchuk is. So, I mean, this could help the CROW's future, especially having the Warriors' first and second round picks. I mean, we'll see how deep the Warriors go this year, where they kind of end up and all that. But I do think that this is a good chance for Fodchuk, especially. Traded to the Rebels last year, didn't quite get to where he wanted to, and now he has a chance at a Founders Cup with the Warriors, and all the power to him. And, well, for his sake, I hope he wins the Founders, because if there's one guy that is more deserving of one that doesn't have one, it is Fodchuk, absolutely. I do find the CROW Mavericks deal of sending Jordan Peck for financial compensation a very interesting one. I thought the CROW could have maybe dealt him for more within the division, but, I mean, all the power to the CROW for giving Peck over to the Mavericks for financial compensation. And then there was a couple of other just small little moves that were a little bit inconsequential, like just some Tier 1 playing rights moving between the Outlaws and Warriors, and then Rebels and CROW having a couple of Tier 1 playing rights as well. But yeah, no, I thought it was a pretty good deadline, all things considered, on kind of how boring it was per se.
Yeah, I know the volume wasn't there. I thought there was a couple of teams that definitely could have looked to improve certain areas of their team for whatever reason. I don't know if they didn't feel it was a priority, or they just couldn't make anything work. It didn't come to fruition. But like I said, on paper, it looks like a tough trade for the Warriors, but when you really look at it and what the situation they're in, I think it's great for them, and it puts them in a position to succeed. And especially now that they get Ben Royer back, in particular, Stash is going to help them a lot too. But Royer is a guy that, like I said, he just, if you think about players, like, how when you play, I don't know, anybody that's played Madden or NHL, whatever, pick a year, and then you have player ratings. Royer instantly bumps everybody up by 5. So everybody that's a 71 becomes a 76. Everybody that is an 85 becomes a 90. He has that type of effect. There's a domino effect. That offense, I believe, is going to become probably the most dangerous one now in the league. And I would watch out. I think that's more than anything. I think that trade, and then that trade and some of these additions they're getting back are going to make a world of difference for them, because the bottom of their roster was really struggling. They had real depth issues. Now those go away, and it's going to be a problem for the rest of the league. So with that, let's talk about these divisions and where they all stand here going into the final couple of weeks. And let's start out east. And it's a 2-horse race. We know the SWAT are going to miss the playoffs. The Kings right now, they sit with 26 points with 3 games remaining, and the Blizzard have 21 points, 4 games remaining. They play twice this weekend in Winnipeg, and if the Blizzard sweep those 2 games, they'll be in position to steal the division all of a sudden from the Kings, and they would get home floor advantage. And home floor advantage in the East is a little bit more important, because that whole best of 3 then gets played in that team's barn. And obviously traveling into a different province, it's not a short trip. And I think that that's a big advantage for whoever's able to get that. And the fact that the Blizzard have that chance with a 2-0 sweep at home this weekend to put themselves in position to have that, I think is saying something, considering they've had to track down the Kings all season long. And don't forget, last year the Blizzard traveled into Regina and pulled a minor upset, sweeping them 2-0. So it's not like the road team is all of a sudden dead. But I think if you ask both those teams, that matters, getting that series at home, and we'll see how that plays out. And I know that you were just talking about the when you ran down the scores, Keenan, you were talking about the Blizzard, and maybe talk a little bit about your player of the week.
Yeah, so normally we would leave this to the end, but let's do it now. Player of the week. Well, you got to give it to Winnipeg Blizzard goaltender Cooper Seniuk in that game on the 23rd, that 18-0 shutout. I was looking through the previous games this year because I didn't think it happened, and I was correct. That is the first shutout all season long in Tier 1. So kudos to him standing his ground against the SWAT. And sure, the SWAT may not put up a ton of goals per game, but they're finding ways to get 4, 5, 6 past guys. So, I mean, good job on him to keep that ball out of that net. And he also picked up an assist in that victory, too. So, good job, Cooper. You are the CROW LAX TV Performer of the Week.
Yeah, so I know there were some people clamoring for some defender and goaltending attention, and I know I've mentioned that we spend a lot of time talking about goaltenders and teams that are keeping the ball out of the net, even if it's not. I mean, it's hard to talk about individuals when it comes to that sort of thing when you're talking about defense. But there you go. Goaltender is a player of the week here out of the Winnipeg Blizzard. So let's go over to the South. And there's really not much to say here. I mean, it's been this way all season long. 1 Shamrocks, 2 Marauders, 3 Mounties, 4 Rockies. Zero drama there. The Rocks are going to await the best of 3 winner between the Marauders and Mountaineers. Once again, when the playoffs begin in 2 weeks, the Marauders and Mountaineers will collide for a second year in a row. The Marauders were able to get by the Mountaineers last year in the first round, 2-0 after a couple of really tight, low-scoring games. Now the North, the Rebels hold the keys here. All they need to do is avoid a major upset loss to either the Crew or the Outlaws in those 3 remaining games combined. And then their season finale with the Warriors inside Bill Hunter won't mean much. Drop one of those games, though, and then the Warriors are all of a sudden in position to surpass them and take home floor and avoid having to play the Outlaws in the first round. The Outlaws obviously sitting third right now. They've all but clinched that, and they'll play the second seed, whether that be the Rebels or the Warriors. And then lastly, and this is where it gets really interesting, is in the Central. And that Maverick win on Friday night basically clinched them a playoff spot. They'll likely finish second. The Silvertips buffered their place in the standings. Early on, they had a torrid start. They still sit at the top. They can't fall out. So now it's going to come down to Red Deer, who's sitting at 16 points, and the Chill, who sit at 15, and each have 4 games to go. And now listen to this. Both teams have pretty tough schedules, but Red Deer's in particular is really rough. 3 out of the 4 are on the road. They go at Mavericks, home to the Silvertips, at the Shamrocks, at the Silvertips. That's the Red Deer road remaining. The Chill road remaining is home to the Mavericks, home to the Marauders, at the Silvertips, at the Mavericks. So they get 2 of the 4 at home, and those are the next 2 games. So, like I said, both teams don't have easy finishes at all. Red Deer, I'd say the only thing in their favor right now is they have the tiebreak because they win the season series 2-1. But a tie at this point isn't all that likely because it's only 1 point separating the 2 teams. So a tie somewhere would have to result again for the tiebreak to come in. And I think right now it feels like the Chill have the inside lane. But it's going to be really interesting to watch down the stretch who gets into that 2-3 series and who's going to be able to fight for a spot in the provincials. So as I mention all that, I know that's quite a bit of lacrosse remaining. Each team playing 4 games, And the two teams up top that division are going to have a large say in that because of those 8 games between the two teams combined. 6 of them are against either the Silvertips or the Mavericks. So in what's been a really tough, hotly contested division all season, it's going to stay that way. And the teams up at the top are going to determine really who, indirectly who gets in here between the Rampage and Chill. Any type of prediction there?
Well, the way that I see things is this final set of 4 games for all 4, the Silvertips, Mavericks, Rampage, Chill, essentially this division is 2 separate 2-horse races. Like you said, the Rampage and the Chill, 1 point separate them at the bottom, but I think one of the more interesting stories is at the top, because the Silvertips, I just have to find where it is. I believe they've lost 3 of their last 4 games. And I don't know what's been going on with the Silvertips, but that stranglehold they had is slipping in the Central. So depending on how these final 4 games go for all the teams, we could even see a Mavericks first round bye and the Silvertips having to work their way through 2 separate playoff rounds. So I would keep my eye definitely on the Silvertips and Mavericks too, because that's going to be a very interesting one. And that's not even to mention the fact that the Silvertips, they're playing the Rampage twice, Chill once, but they've also got a matchup against the South Division leading Shamrocks as well. That game this coming Saturday at Plainsman Arena. So that one's also going to be a very interesting game, because the way the Shamrocks have been playing, you consider they might lose that game. That's only 3 games left now. And the Mavericks, I believe have Chill twice, Rampage once, and Mounties once. The Mavericks could win all 4 of those. So if the Silvertips happen to lose against the Shamrocks and then stumble somewhere against the Rampage or the Chill, this is a completely different division come 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, no, there's a lot left on the table there. And I think if you're a fan of lacrosse, I think these are the types of situations and races that you want to see. I think that, each of these teams definitely have their own little pockets of strengths, and they have their weaknesses. And it's going to be really intriguing to see down the stretch what wins out, because each of those teams definitely has a unique style as well. And some teams match up a little bit better than others against certain opponents. So it's going to be really fun. Whoever ends up getting in, I think it's going to be a hell of a 2-3 series to get that second spot into the Larry Bishop. So I know we just broke down each division here, where everybody stands and how they're, what they need to do to either get into the playoffs, win their division, clinching scenarios. So I think this is a good time, Keenan, to let everybody know how your power rankings stack up.
Yeah, so my power rankings, a bit of movement for this week's power rankings, I will say. The obvious one, number 1, has not changed, and that's the Shamrocks, sitting at the top of the South, remaining 15-1-0 on the year. Very, very good job from Jason Crook's club down in Calgary. Moving up to the number 2 spot, I got the Fort Saskatchewan Rebels, who have won 7 of their last 8 and 9 of their last 11 after a pretty weak start. I believe 1-4-0 to start the year. I think they've put the Warriors on their heels. The Warriors had that bye. I believe they had the bye last year. But now they're going to force the Warriors to play through the Outlaws, which, you could say in the North that is a bit of a lopsided matchup, but you're still getting guys who are going to play the weekend ahead of time when you've already had that weekend of rest. Potentially. You never know. The North could swing as well. Moving into the 3 spot, I have the Queen City Kings. They're continuously coming out west and just dominating guys with very minimal losses. I think 13-4-0 is what their official record is. 2 games at home lost, 2 games on the road lost, but they are doing a good job out east. We'll see how they match up against the Blizz coming down into the final stretch of the season. Slipping down to the number 4 spot, I have the Silvertips. Again, like I mentioned, they lost 3 of their last 4, and they've lost their stranglehold that they had early this season on the Central. So, like we were talking about, the Central Division, just one of those contested hot zones that you never know what's going to happen, even coming into week 11 of the season here. In the 5 spots, I have the Chill, running on a 3-game win streak right now, and they're getting hot when it matters. And like you were talking about, they're 1 point behind the Rampage for 3rd, and that is going to be a very tightly contested 3rd place in the division. And then for an honorable mention, I have the Mavericks. They're staying strong, and they're gaining on the tips with only 4 games to go. They're the 3 points back. Still anybody's game there in the Central.
All good points. I would, I'll start at the bottom and work my way up here. So, as I've said before, and this is a disclaimer, it's important for people to understand that these are power rankings, okay? They're not standings. Otherwise, they'd just be called standings. We'd read them off. We'd go to the RMLL site, and we'd read them off for you. But I think most people can read, so we won't go through that process. What would be the point, right? That's not interesting. Power rankings are how you see each team moving forward, and if those 2 teams were to play in a best of 7, who you would take. All right, so I just want to make that clear for everybody. So with that, I'm going to start with honorable mention, because from about 2 to after the Shamrocks, when you're talking power rankings right now, I'd say from about 2 to 7, you could go in any direction with those teams inside that pocket. So right now, I'm going to go honorable mention the Mavericks. I think that, again, they play a very gritty game. I think that the additions they made are going to help them. I just don't know. The only reason that I have them just outside the top 5 is watching them play. Their offense seems very disjointed. They rely a lot on transition. And if teams play a certain way against them and clean up some of the mistakes that they take advantage of, I don't know if they have enough top end to get by some of the better teams. So that's why I'm going to put them in honorable mention at 6, basically. Okay. At 5, I'm going to go with the Rebels. They have really picked up their game of late. I would have liked to see them maybe add somebody at the deadline. I think that they might be a guy or 2 short on the offensive side of things. I think that they are pretty deep, though. Like, they can beat you in a number of different ways. I think McGilvery is a guy that if they ride in the playoffs, that's going to help them a lot. I think he's really good. I don't know if enough people have realized that yet. And I think that the Rebels are a team that can beat anyone. And I think that they've done a good job of beating the teams they should beat. I mean, if you look, they've got a lot of wins against like the CROW, the Outlaws, the SWAT. So right now I have them at 5. At 4, I've got the Kings. Same story all year. They're going to hit double digits. I think I was telling somebody the other day, might have even been you, Keenan. I think they've hit double digits in like 13 of their 16 games or 13 of their 17 games, something like that.
About there, yeah.
Yeah, it's been very, very, they've just been a well-oiled machine that way. They do give up their fair share, but when you can score, you're going to be in almost any game. So they're at 4. The Silvertips are going to go from 2 to 3 for me. Their win-loss has been a lot shakier of late. I wish I would have seen them at least once here in person to give a better breakdown. But they are in a tough division. They play a pretty tough schedule overall. They're a team I just really want to see in person before I feel like I have a better feel for them. But for now, they'll sit at 3. I think their goaltender gives them an advantage over a lot of teams. Now at 2, I'm going with the Warriors. And I know people are going to have problems with this. But I mean, at the end of the day, their offense now is balanced. They've sorted out their depth issues. This is not the same team that anybody has seen for the last couple of months. I can promise you that. I think that now with Fodchuk and Royer on the left side, they've got feeders over there, which was a problem for them before. And now I think they can get back to more of an off-ball game that's always given, it's always put them in position to succeed. That's been their strength. I would expect, offensive coach Graydon Cornfield to really get those guys clicking again. Now you add Stashnik out the back gate as well. He can provide some offense and moving the ball up the floor. The roster is just a lot better. And so they're going to sit at 2, and there's no way you can take the Shamrocks out of 1. They've been from start to finish. They've been the most consistent team. They go about their business, very smoothly. There hasn't been really, other than the Blizzard loss, there hasn't really been any hiccups. They haven't dropped games they shouldn't have. And so they're going to be at 1. So that's sort of where I'm at right now, with how the league shakes out. And again, feel free to hit us up. Let us know what you feel or what you think. It should be a really fun playoff run here. Now, before we conclude, I want to take some time to talk about some things that matter a lot more than lacrosse. First off, I want to start with Avery Wyke from the Sylvan Red Deer area. I know he spent time with the Mavericks, the Red Deer Tier 1 team, the Red Deer Tier 2 team. He was in a bad accident last Friday. He was on a scooter with his family and he was hit by a vehicle. He was transported to hospital from the Red Deer area to Calgary, and he's in ICU as they try to deal with a lot of his injuries. I don't really know too much more than that. Obviously, we want to wish him well. We want to wish his family well, and all of his friends. And I know, Keenan, you have a link that I think I sent you for a GoFundMe if you want to let everybody know where they can find that.
Yeah, down in the description below this podcast, you should see a link tree link. If you click that, it will take you right to our page with all our links, and right near the bottom there would be a link right to the GoFundMe for Avery.
Yeah, so anybody who wishes to donate or, to send a message, any little thing I think helps. Anything you can do for Avery and his family, I know they would appreciate. And again, best wishes to Avery, and we hope that he has a fast recovery. Now, also, and this is very sad, I know I touched on this before the break, Michael DiGirolamo did end up passing away. I know we mentioned this. He was in ICU. And I know over the last number of years, he has battled leukemia. I don't want to guess on what ended up being the cause. I haven't got confirmation, so we're not going to talk about that. But I wanted to just take some time to talk a little bit about Mike and some of his, just who he was and what he meant to the lacrosse community and some of his accomplishments through lacrosse. So I remember I first met Mike back in 2011. He was a 17-year-old from the Vermilion area that came and tried out for the Edmonton Eclipse, who are now defunct. They were a junior A team in Edmonton. They ended up moving to Sherwood Park by 2013, but from about 2006 to 2012, them and the Miners were the junior A teams in the Edmonton area in the north. And he, right from the get-go, I had graduated the year before. I wasn't in junior anymore, but I remember my dad coming home from tryouts one day and being like, you got to see this kid. Like, he's massive. He moves well. He's completely completely a lacrosse guy. He's committed. He's motivated. He's going to give us a real chance to win. And keep in mind, this is a kid, right, like he's a 17-year-old, a rookie. And I knew, like, right there, like, for my dad to be talking about the kid like that, he was special. They were in a rebuilding phase that year, and they made the Minto. They upset the Mountaineers and went on to the Minto was in Okotoks that year. The Raiders were hosting. So they made the final against the Raiders. I believe the Raiders won in 5 in that best of 7. But they made the Minto when nobody gave them a shot. And, they went 0-3, as expected in that Minto, but he was just somebody that gave the team a feeling that they could win no matter what. Well, no matter what the situation was, he just had a calming presence. He was always sort of in control of his emotions. And he was a guy that gave other guys confidence on the floor, off of it. I can't speak enough to just the nature, the good natured attitude and sort of personality that he had. I remember also during that tournament, Kurt Malosky, and anybody who knows anything about lacrosse will know who Kurt Malosky is. Longtime NLL coach, senior A, junior A, won Minto Cup, who was coaching Coquitlam at the time. I remember him aggressively trying to get Mike, and Mike would tell me, he's telling me that he'll get me a cottage out on the lake, and they're going to set me up with this if I ever go out there, if I get traded or wherever they want me. And that's the impression that Mike left on so many people as a young. Again, he was 17 years old, and he had guys that, with a ton of lacrosse pedigree going, man, we want this kid. Like, how can we get him? That was how impressive his junior career was. He went on to play, he played his first 2 years for the Eclipse. Then they moved to Sherwood Park. He played there, and then he actually ended up with the Raiders and Whitby out in Ontario to finish off his junior career. He would go on to get drafted by the Edmonton Rush. And the best way I could describe Mike was a calming and very confident player on the floor. And intimidating inside the crease. You could not see any net. Like when you shot on him, you could not see any net. But just a kind, gentle person off of it. I want to send my best wishes to his family, his mom, his dad, his brother, Matt, who does play for the senior minors. Mike was somebody that the lacrosse community will miss. And sorry, I just wanted to say one last time goodbye, Mike, and everybody's not. Sorry, I'm losing my mind here. The lacrosse community just won't be the same. So long, my friend. Thanks so much for listening to the Junior Beast podcast. We move through the end of the season and near the playoffs, and we'll talk to you again next week.